Hello, and welcome to this latest edition of Talk About London, a podcast about how to make the capital city a better place. I'm Leanne Tritton, Chair of the London Society, one of the UK's oldest charitable civic societies.
And I'm Dave Hill, publisher and editor of the journalism website onlondon.co.uk.
So London's architecture is one of its most distinctive features, drawing millions of visitors to admire its fabulous buildings. But it is also integral to our daily lives. The look and feel of our homes, streets, hospitals, schools and places of work can either lift us up or bring us down.
The Royal Institute of British Architects, RIBA for short, is the main professional body for architects in the UK. It also runs the Sterling Prize, which is the built environment equivalent of the Oscars.
So every 2 years, the RIBA elects a new president to advocate for better architecture. And today we are joined by Muyiwa Oki, who has just completed his term in that very important role. Muyiwa is not only the youngest president, he is also the first Black president of the RIBA. Muyiwa, welcome.
Hello Leanne. Hello Dave. Good to be here.
So your time as RIBA president has coincided with a challenging period for the profession, with developers, government and Londoners wanting new things from buildings in the wake of COVID and amid the continuing concerns about climate change, building safety and also, of course, housing shortages. And there's also been an ongoing debate, the ever ongoing debate about architectural beauty. I'm not sure that that's new. I think it's always been happening, hasn't it?
Tale as old as time.
Exactly. So my first question is, in 50 years' time, when people look back at what is being built now, what do you think they'll see? And what architectural styles or ideas are shaping London's next chapter?
In 50 years' time, I hope that we get to understand the purpose behind each building. In my term in office, I decided to start the conversation about how we move or close the gap, the perception gap about what what people understand architecture is and what architects do to what we actually do in reality. And I'm a strong advocate for architecture as public service, something that we see that architecture and buildings are where our life actually happens. You know, the bits in between a building is the architecture as much as the building itself. Parks, the schools and stuff the streets that we create is part of the narrative. And I hope in the next 10, 20, absolutely 50 years, we understand that buildings were designed for a particular purpose, and whether that is to house the number that we have people in, because there's quite a lot of homelessness in the city, but also ensure that we understand that it's not just what's it called, a money play, about buildings just being seen as an asset to be to gain profit or things like that. So investable asset. So that's what I would like to see more about when it comes to architecture and buildings.
Yeah, I think you raise a really interesting point, because I think most people go into architecture definitely with a sense of public service, but perhaps as they start to practice architecture, the realities of how the market actually works is sometimes changes, first of all, what they can deliver versus what they want set out to do. And I know I often hear people talk, they'll see a building and they'll complain about, look what the architect has done there, or they'll say great things. But it's not always the architect responsible for that. Is that the case?
Yeah, they're very much so, because we are living in more sort of, I would say, hyper-financialized world where things are, also creative endeavors are such that they need to make money for the investor as opposed to the purpose that it's meant to serve. We see it in I have my fiance keeps telling me that I should stop talking about this, but talking about like the desertification of modern cinema. And I see it all the time because movies right now, only in my view, most of them, the high budget ones, are just put together so that the the investors and studios make money out of it, as opposed to being nice stories to tell for us to watch over and over again. And I see that I have seen that over in my very short time so far in architecture, where um, you see the towers and such being built just because it has a potential better return value. And I can see some examples now. When I was at the AJ's Retrofit Roadshow, and what's the name? Canary Wharf Group was presenting their idea for renovation of the HSBC Tower. And I think that's what we want to see more of. To see buildings have character, and have a purpose for the end user outside of um, creating returns for its investors.
Yeah, actually you've taken us beautifully into a segue, really, into the idea of retrofit. And if listeners don't know what that means, that's reusing buildings. And when I asked that question about 50 years' time, when people will look back, I think that there is going to be, we're into a golden era of reusing buildings. And I was at the same conference. And for those of
Yeah,
you who don't know, there's a building in Canary Wharf, the HSBC Tower. It's a fairly traditional banking tower. And the plans to reuse it are quite extraordinary. I mean, really ripping out floors, putting in gardens, outdoor space.
on the
It
roof.
is
Yeah, yeah,
masterful. And when Dave and I were talking about this session earlier today, I was reminded of a phrase that the Japanese use called, and I'm just looking away so I get it correct, and that is kintsugi, and that is the art of patching things together. And
yes,
will
I know that.
will we be looking at London and the buildings of London and celebrating the fact that they've all been patched back together and we're not wasting anything anymore?
Yeah, I would hope so. I would hope so. The UK Green Building Council have this research and a stat that says that 80% of the buildings that we're going to be using, especially in the UK, by the year 2050, so that's 30 years, sort of halfway between your question, the timeline in your question, already here. So 80% of the buildings that we're going to use in the next 30 years we already have them. So if we want to create and be sustainable, we need to find a way to use those 80% of the building that we already have. And like you said, and I agree, retrofit and reuse, especially for a well-developed city like London, will be not just a nice to have, but the way in which we operate. That's not to say that new buildings will go up, because there's a need to densify London, because we're still behind other major cities when it comes to densification. That's going to be part of, I think, part of the answer to the housing needs. But also we need to take very seriously and create the systems for retrofitting and reuse, and being that the same level of design aspiration as a new building.
Do you think that the architecture profession will lead on that? Are they the best people placed to show us how to do all of that?
Yes, very much so, because we not to toot our own horn, we are the lead designers on most projects, especially one that have a civic or more public a slant to them. And again, that's the rub of the RIB and rub of the president so far, is to make that case for having quality outputs at the end, and having profession like the architect profession with design expertise leading the way.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's some amazing examples at the moment of reuse. I mean, I'm actually quite excited. I know some architects are worried about, I guess we've moved away from that idea of building the ta-da tower, although there's still some of those going up, and the ability to bring these other buildings to life. And they're not that old, some of them. I mean, I'll use a good example that Dave used to hang around all the time, and that's City Hall, the Norman
Yes.
Foster building, which is
Yes.
already being stripped back to reuse. I mean, I've got jackets that are older than that building, and it's already having to be reused.
Yes, yeah, and that is a challenge of our time, especially because the sort of Greek and Roman designers and architects built their building in such a way that it is still there, it is still standing there, and we all over the world do this pilgrimage to go see it. That is, I think, in the next 50 years, that is a challenge to all of us in the architecture design industry to ensure that our buildings are similar to our our predecessors in terms of longevity. And to say that, I mean, one thing I did with when I was in post was to rethink in some way what our awards stands for, and the Sterling Prize that you introduced, Dave, which is like as you said, the Oscars for the built environment for architecture. We gave last year. I gave it to the Elizabeth line. And I remember in the discussions and deliberations, part of it was the fact that it was designed for 100 years. And we need to start thinking about, when you think about fantastic award-winning buildings, are they designed? What's the lifespan of said building? Does that merit an award? Does that merit us campaigning and championing it and putting it on the billboards and posters and on the BBC and such?
And that's a very interesting point because, of course, some London Underground stations have already lasted for more than 100 years. And so the Elizabeth Line's got a bit of an act to follow there, hasn't it? Can I ask you a question which just slightly broadens out the context for this discussion, I think, because which includes the whole business of retrofitting, because my innocent perspective on these things, I can sort of, in a sense, I can see perhaps different forces acting on the architectural profession, broadly speaking, perhaps particularly in London. Because on the one hand, as we were saying at the beginning, there are complaints that a lot of buildings, particularly residential buildings, are a bit dull, they're a bit formulaic, there isn't much scope for architectural creativity in a lot of those buildings. But on the other hand, there are some other forces in play which suggest that this could be a kind of promising time to be involved in architecture. For example, we've talked about retrofit. Now, the London Society held an event on Saturday morning about housing in the square mile, and quite a lot of it was spent talking about office buildings that have sort of gone out of date and companies no longer want those buildings. And I think the term for these kinds of office buildings are stranded assets. And there was a lot of talk about whether through permitted development or otherwise these can be successfully converted. And there are many misgivings. I mean, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I went and saw a former office building that's been converted for residential use out in Uxbridge, and it's been a bit of a disaster. However, maybe there are really good ways that it can be done. And this is where architecture comes into its own. The other thought I had while you were talking goes back to a post-COVID conversation that I had where somebody was talking about new buildings and the new office buildings. This is not residential buildings, new office buildings, and the importance of making them attractive to people, because employers would really like people to return to the office. You know, they'd rather they weren't working from home if possible. So they have to kind of up their game, and also the architecture around buildings, so streets and neighborhoods and parks and what have you. So is there a sense in which, this is an age of opportunity for architecture in London?
Definitely so. I do think let's not say that there is quite a lot of failing streets and whatnot. There are pockets and great parts of London that you see good design and they build and building in tandem with the community, or encouraging communities to come through. For example, the King's Cross redevelopment is a fantastic example of how, it took quite a while, 20 years. For those who haven't been, go see it. It's just amazing in terms of the split, in terms of housing to residential and to office space to sort of mixed use development. I think they have done a fantastic redevelopment of a place and made it a sense of place for people to hang out. Because I remember growing up in London, but I grew up in South London, but going up to King's Cross, that was a no-go area, a relatively no-go area. But over the past 10, 20 years, it's become a destination as well as a place to go through. And I think that is going to your point. I think again, the developers on that project, Argent, employed architects on two sides. So architects to do the master planning and thinking, and also the architects to do different architects that were proportioned to develop the different sites in different phases. And I remember one of the key strokes or levels of genius that not many people will be super aware of is the fact that going back to King's Cross, the fact that King's Cross connects with Copenhagen Street on the mid part of the site, and that's sort of the thinking and the level of detail um, that architects bring into the conversation. Because again, they didn't have to do that. That's they are literally in a different borough to one part of Copenhagen Street is a different borough to another part of Copenhagen, and to knit those communities together was just a simple let's continue this street across our development to make sure that it connects and brings people in, and we're not eating.
And sorry to interrupt, but I think you're dead right on that. And I think the other thing that people forget is the guys from Argent were all trained architects, or most of them were. I can't fact check that, but I think it is a wonderful example of people who are trained architects. They shifted into development, but they had the mindset of the creative outcome and the art of the possible. And you can really see it in the detail that has come through on King's Cross. And I'm completely with you. I think it's a great example of what can be achieved. I think we focus a lot because that's how the human mind works. We focus on where stuff goes wrong, but in fact, when it does go right, it's quite extraordinary. And can I take you back to Canary Wharf? You raised Canary Wharf, and we haven't been sponsored by Canary Wharf for this episode, but I'm going to say something else that's good about them. So the London Society did a tour about 6 weeks ago down at Canary Wharf, looking at, first of all, the public space. And again, when I have been going there for 30 years, and it was very much office buildings and some nice, clean space outside, but it wasn't very exciting. The
Mhm.
public space now is quite extraordinary, and the amount of residential that they've brought in is, again, a huge change for them, bringing in residential into a business area. And the style has changed dramatically. You go from one part, which is very much glass and steel, to now a very warm sort
Brick.
of down wood wharf. It's all brick and, looks quite New Yorky. Is the era of glass and steel over? Not trying to get you into the Star Wars, but also trying to get you into the Star Wars.
Yeah, well, I don't think the era of glass and steel, uh, the modern era, so the early 20th century, from my um understanding, relative general understanding, was that it was new technology back
Mm,
then, where they're moving away from stone and masonry and stuff. This was cutting edge,
mhm.
and I don't think it will continue to be continued. I do believe so. The material scientists and such out there who are listening, they are going to be doing great, fantastic things with zero carbon steel, zero carbon concrete, and such. So we're going to still continue to use steel, in my view. But I think we'll be using it, like you're saying, we'll be using it in a very different way. We'll be using it in a very conscious way. So there won't be concrete frame buildings with concrete facades and such, like we had Le Corbusier and co doing it back in the early 20th century, because again, that's slightly wasteful. But we'll be using it more in an intelligent way and add in add in some depth and color and using timber, because again, I remember seeing a timber frame building going up to a multi-story timber frame building up to like more than 10 stories or something like that. So materials science is changing and evolving, and we'll be pushing what it is, what types of materials that we can use to make the buildings more effortless as times go on. So steel and concrete and such and glass will still be used. Don't worry.
Can I ask where you think, it's a big question, where do you think public taste is now in terms of traditional versus modern? I know these are large and slightly artificial categories.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a body of opinion which says if only we built houses in the traditional manner, people would be far less resistant to new housing developments, they say. And then there are other, and then there's another school of thought which says, but people will complain about things being modern and new and alien at the start, but then eventually they love them, they adore them. So where do you think public opinion is on those sorts of issues at the moment?
I think, unfortunately, public opinion is regressing. So we want to, like you're saying, Dave, we want to move back to sort of neoclassical styles, and I think I say no to that. One of the part of being a young is gives you a sense of youth, gives you a sense of possibility, but also a humility that we don't know anything. We need to take everyone approach of sensibilities along with you. And I think architects, by and large, we need to start talking about why and how we can get the warmth or the sort of sensory. We can design for the sensory feelings as well as pushing the conversation forward. I believe that this whole idea of NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard, comes from sort of a group of people who feel that their voices are not being heard enough.
Mm-hmm. But they tend to be people who want either no change or they want only more of the stuff that they've already got.
Yeah, and I think we need to take people's hand on that journey, and public consultation needs a little bit more redefinition or redesign, where it's not just in a town hall or church hall, and only a handful of people who are objectors uh, attend those
and
meetings.
have a lot of time on their hands.
Exactly.
To read complicated planning documents.
We need to bring younger people into the conversation because they are, unfortunately, they're going to be part of the main cohort who are going to be living in or benefit or not benefiting from the changes in planning.
Okay, so this is a conversation Leanne and I and others have had many, many times. How do you do that? How do you get there? So give us what's your answer to that difficult question? How do you broaden the base of people who are involved in making these decisions?
I think we kind of do that already. In some ways, in other parts of society, like when we're campaigning for public office and such. So people do canvassing. We need to think about planning, especially when it comes to major infrastructure or major civil project as a opportunity to canvass, knock on doors. We've been doing that for a while. When it comes to public political engagement, why don't we do it for public engagement? Secondly, digital tool. I know there are some companies, startup companies, or more established companies who are using the gamifying the consultation process. So you have, there's a form that you have to fill, but it's not just the standard black and white form. It has infographics and pictures that gives you a flavor of what you are actually what with this proposal proposed, and what you can how you can change, or if you have ideas, how you can change those ideas, and have it implemented.
Mm.
So those two things, as well as your church role, public engagement, those three, I think, will make the whole process and bring a lot more people into the conversation.
Yeah, well, I think there is we did another podcast on exactly on this whole issue, didn't we? Leanne, with Mike Kiley, which is talking about just basically trying to explain to people how the planning process works and how public input works. It isn't necessarily by drawing up large protest petitions. It's about coming up with a very specific suggestion about how things might be different, which is sort of and arguably in line with planning policy. That's the way to do it. People don't know that, so there is a lot of educating to be done, I guess. But just as you were speaking, something came to mind. So there's a big project in Earl's Court that's underway at the moment, and I've been doing some work on that. And they are very proud. The company that's doing it, the Earl's Court Development Company, are very proud of their public engagement. And I spoke to one of the young people who was involved in some of that, a young woman. I think she was coming up to her A-levels, and I was very struck when I asked her about tall buildings. So of course there have been the usual sorts of debates about possible height of new buildings and so on, and some people not being very happy about it and so on. And I said, well, what do you think about tall buildings? And she said, oh, I think they're lovely, I think they're really great. I love them. Now, somebody like that would probably not go to the town hall, or perhaps, even though she was extremely capable young person, submit a comment or an observation through the official channels. She wouldn't, like most of us, wouldn't know about them. So you might, if you were able to encourage more sort of meaningful and constructive interaction with the planning system, maybe you would get from younger people, but also others, maybe you would get a different
other voices.
Debate.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah.
I'm talking too much. I'm talking too much. You talk.
No, I think so. No, I think I have been part of that as well. I remember when I was working on the North London Heat and Power project, which is 1.6, if I remember correctly, 1.6 hectare redevelopment of a facility in North London, energy facility in North London, and it's part owned by the 7 boroughs of North London. And because it's such a massive undertaking, and it has touch point across 7 boroughs, it means that the local borough, Enfield, that the site was located on, took most of the opportunity to engage with its residents, to assuage the fears that because we're putting 2 new sort of chimney stacks with smoke coming out of it, we're not polluting the environment. Because actually we weren't trying to do it. It was meant to recycle all the waste across the North London boroughs. But I think we did several town hall meetings. We went to the local Asda and Sainsbury's to get people's opinions on the issues. And it got built and still being built, although I'm not part of the project anymore. But I got to see firsthand that when you're committed, especially local authorities committed, they will find we will engage and find the voices that aren't ordinarily heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also, I think it's such a fine line, isn't it, with particularly on the design side, with consultation and also leadership from architects. Because, again, giving the London Society a bit of a plug, we did an event with the 20th Century Society a couple of weeks ago where we looked at 3 projects from the Millennium, and 2 of them at the time, one being the Millennium Dome and the other one being the London Eye. I remember as a resident, thinking they were completely bonkers. You know, the idea that a Ferris wheel was going up on the South Bank of London, I thought everyone had lost their mind. And of course, when it went up, and now it's 25 years
This,
old, it's just a
yeah,
joy. And you know, the creators, Julia Barfield and her husband David Marks, you know, have
yeah,
given London an amazing gift. They also
skyline, yeah.
yeah, they funded it in such a way that the local area gets, I think they've given £14 million worth of income. So, you know, what do I know? And if I had been consulted, I would have ticked no. um, and
But
similarly, the dome. Sorry, yes, keep going. Sorry.
no, it just goes to show that people's opinions change. Similar to what Dave asked, like where is opinion, public opinion, when it comes to styles? I think styles change, and go back to my earlier point, the purpose of the building. If it has a strong and a very clear purpose, sense of purpose, and then adds to the experience and the joy of the city, people love it. People will love it, will grow to love it, whether it has pins sticking out of it or.
That's a very, very good point. So but just before we wrap up, because we've been, I think, wonderfully optimistic on this session, which is great. But what is
I
the
try.
mood of the architecture profession? And as it was by design that we wanted you on as the youngest ever
Yeah.
president, because it's unusual to get someone taking this role at the beginning or at their early days of
Middle.
their
Yeah.
career
Yeah. True.
rather than at the end. So what's the vibe with architects at the moment, particularly young architects, in leading us all into a better life?
Well, I perhaps this is the wrong place to end the conversation. I think the vibe is a little bit downbeat. Um, a part of the reason is the fact that there have been changes to the government relationship and how to fund level 7 apprenticeships. I came on a mandate in my presidency to diversify and be more inclusive in terms of the type of person who wants to be an architect. And apprenticeships was one of the ways in which various people from different social and economic backgrounds will be able to um, start a course in an architecture profession. Recent announcement, policy announcement that apprenticeships are only going to be for 20 people between 20, well, under 21 years old, means that architects who need a master's degree to study and to become an architect won't be part of that uh, apprenticeships levy and funding. So there is a few people, especially people who have contacted me about this, and we are doing, and I'm sure that the team at RIBA will continue to be doing more to advocate and campaign for expanding that threshold cutoff line, especially for if we want quality outcomes in the built environment. We want architects to be part of that delivery mechanism. We need to ensure that not only folks who can afford a university degree can be part of that team. So it's a little bit frustrating, but there's more work to be done.
Yeah. Well, I think we all hope you're very successful, because I think London needs as many sort of creative practitioners and architects as possible, because, you know, as Dave and I have been working on a number of events recently, you know, we're only a pinpoint in the history of London. It's constantly evolving, and people will
That's correct.
look back at this era and wonder either what the hell were they doing, or did they do a good job? We don't know what that decision will be, but I think we might end it there, if that's okay with you, Muyiwa.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. It's been a real pleasure having you on, and congratulations on a great 2-year presidency. And I hope you get some of your life back now.
Yeah, I do get some of my life back. But thank you so much, Dave. Thank you so much, and I think it was a great conversation. And